Welcome to the third week of the history of rock. This week we take a look at the period between 1960 and the end of 1963, the beginning of 1964. You may remember that last week we were talking about that first wave of rock and roll between 1955 and 1959, 1960, talking about people like Chuck Berry and Little Richard, Fats Domino, Bill Haley, Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly. And we asked the question when we got to the end of it, when rock and roll was in such trouble and a lot of the major figures were off the scene and there were the big payola investigations, would this period that follows, this period now from 60 through 63, really be a kind of dark ages for rock and roll where the music business sort of took everything over and turned it into something far less interesting and edgy than it had been before? Or could it perhaps be a time when a bunch of new styles get going that are fun and interesting and maybe even cut short by the British invasion, which we'll talk about next week, which arrives in early 1964. So that's pretty much the issue that we're going to be dealing with in this week's class. And let me just give you an overview of some of the things that we'll be talking about this week, and then we'll dive into some of those. So let's just take a look at what we're going to be talking about this week. Here's the overview. The overview idea here, besides thinking about whether this is a good period or a bad period for rock music, is to think about what was going on in the business as they were trying to put this music together. And the big idea, I think, to keep in mind is that this period is sort of characterized by a search for the next Elvis. What the business had seen in this period from 55 through 59 was the buildup of this youth market for music. So people in the music business knew there was plenty of money that could be made from this market. But now with a lot of the major figures, the original figures sort of out of the situation, the question was, well, how could they find the next big thing? How could they find the next big thing that would be like Elvis, would have the kind of success that Elvis Presley had? So they tried a bunch. I mean, they threw a lot of things up against the wall to see what would stick, and here are some of them. There's a Brill building model that dominates pop. We'll talk a little bit about the Brill building in just a minute. It's a kind of a return to a previous model that starts to divide singers and writers again the way they had been sort of pre-rock and roll. The Brill building is both a place and an approach, and we'll talk about that. But this Brill building approach, professional songwriters sort of writing songs to order as hit songs, this kind of thing, produces new teen groups. So we'll talk about girl groups, we'll talk about teen idols, we'll talk about how this music is designed specifically to really exploit this new teen market. Another thing we'll talk about is the rise of the record producer during this period, the idea that develops this role that hadn't been there previously of a record producer who really sort of controls the way records are recorded and the sound of the record in a way that had not been done before. Lieber and Stoller will be important in that. Also Phil Spector. We'll talk about older teens, when the kids who had been the teenagers during the Elvis Presley years now move on. A lot of them move on to folk music, and folk music becomes the new music of seriousness, a kind of a pop style for more mature kids. And we'll talk about the growth of sweet soul and surf music, both of those new styles that emerge. And so if you end up being an advocate for thinking of this as a golden age, these may be styles that you're interested in advocating for. And then we'll continue the rockabilly story as I promised last time when I told you that we would return to the Everly Brothers and Ricky Nelson in the next video. So we're here now, and we'll take a time to look at that. So let's move on to the next video. We'll start with the Brill building approach.